He used to hit me. That's what she said. Softly. Almost too softly for the detectives to hear. The words hung in the air like fog. Romy Reiner had just found both of her parents. Rob Reiner, 78, the Hollywood legend, and Michelle Reiner, 70, stabbed to death inside their $13.5 million Brentwood estate. It was a scene out of a horror movie. Blood. Silence. A broken family. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And in the middle of it all stood their daughter, Romy, 29 years old, trembling, disheveled, and not just from shock, but from something else. Something older, deeper, something that, for years, she never spoke of. Until now. So let me ask you something. Why would a daughter wait until her father's death, a brutal, public, high-profile murder, to say the unthinkable? Why now? And more importantly, what else has she been hiding? This isn't just a Hollywood tragedy. This is a family unraveling, a mask pulled off, and the raw truth bleeding out in real time. We're about to unpack a case that's more than murder. It's more than inheritance, more than family dysfunction. This is the story of a woman raised behind fame and forced smiles, who finally said, enough. And once you hear what Romy endured behind the golden gates of Brentwood, the accolades, red carpets, and father-daughter photos will never look the same again. Because when Romy opened her mouth, she shattered the myth of America's favorite dad. And what she revealed, it may just leave you speechless. Let's go back. The facade of perfection. Rob Reiner wasn't just a celebrity, he was royalty. Not just because of the Emmy-winning role in All in the Family. Not just because he directed When Harry Met Sally or The Princess Bride or Stand By Me. But because he was seen as that rare thing in Hollywood, a good man, a devoted husband, a feminist, an activist, and most damning of all, a great father. Every interview painted him as grounded, gentle, intelligent, funny, safe. His marriage to Michelle was called one of the most stable in show business. His children? Adored. The Reiners were the kind of family you didn't just admire, you envied them. But what if all of that was a lie? What if behind every red carpet smile was a clenched jaw? What if the applause outside drowned out the screams inside? And what if one of the Reiner children, the quietest one, was living in fear? Romy, the invisible daughter. We barely heard from her. Ever. Unlike Nick Reiner, who made headlines for his addictions, stints in rehab, and film about his troubled youth, being Charlie, Romy stayed in the background. She didn't ride the coattails of her father's fame. She didn't pose for tabloids. She didn't chase interviews. In fact, if you searched her name just a year ago, you'd find more questions than answers. Who was Romy Reiner? Now we know. She was the one who found the bodies. She was the one who told police, there's someone dangerous in this family. And she was the one who, for the first time in her life, broke the family code of silence. When she told police that Rob Reiner used to hit her, the air shifted. This wasn't just trauma. It was truth. Painful, inconvenient, reputation-destroying truth. And yet, it was only the beginning. December 14th, the day the Reiners died. It was a quiet Sunday. Until it wasn't. Romy had reportedly stopped by her parents' estate just after 5 p.m. The sun was low. Christmas decorations were up. A typical California winter evening. But the moment she stepped into the foyer, she knew. The smell. The eerie stillness. A coldness that wasn't just about temperature. Inside, she found Rob and Michelle's bodies. Stab wounds. Pooling blood. No signs of forced entry. And in that moment, Romy didn't scream. She didn't call out. She walked silently to her phone and dialed 911. And when the operator picked up, her voice barely cracked. There's someone in the house, she said. But no one else was found there. At least, not right then. The guest house, where Nick lived. Just 30 yards from the main house sat the guest house. Nick Reiner's domain. 32 years old. Former addict. Living under his parents' roof again after what was called a relapse. Some called it rehab. Others called it house arrest. But that night, Nick wasn't at the main house. Police found him in the guest house. Calm. Distant. Reportedly smelling faintly of bleach. And when they asked where he had been all night, he said, I was asleep. No sign of struggle. No visible wounds. No immediate answers. But when officers told Romy that Nick was being questioned, she didn't blink. She just said, he should be a suspect. But why wait to speak? That's what people kept asking. Why didn't Romy say something earlier? If Rob was abusive, emotionally or physically, why didn't she speak during the Me Too era? Why now? The timing seemed too neat, too explosive, and for some, too convenient. But for others, it made perfect sense. Because for women raised in fear, silence is survival. Because when your abuser is beloved by millions, speaking up can feel like suicide. Because sometimes, the truth only feels safe when the person who hurt you is gone. And in Rob's death, Romy didn't just lose her father. She lost the man who had silenced her for decades. So when she finally told detectives, "He used to hit me," it wasn't just grief talking. It was release. It was rage. It was revenge. The secret police didn't expect. One detective on the scene would later describe Romy's demeanor as numb but precise. She didn't cry. She didn't beg for justice. She simply talked. And the more she talked, the darker the portrait became. She mentioned past incidents. She mentioned hands around my arm. She mentioned being locked in. And she said it all without raising her voice. Because sometimes, when a person has carried trauma for decades, the telling doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with detachment, until something cracks. And that crack came when she mentioned the diary. "It's still in my closet." That's what she told detectives. A notebook, hidden for years. A record of what happened. Every slap, every scream, every moment she couldn't forget. And what she wrote down wasn't fiction. It was the truth she wasn't ready to say out loud. Until now. And what detectives would find inside that diary, names, dates, accusations, would blow the case wide open. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What did Romy Reiner really see when she opened that front door? Because according to the police, her story doesn't quite match the scene. And that gap, that chilling silence between perception and reality, is where everything begins to unravel. Let's rewind. Back to that Sunday, December 14th, the last day Rob and Michelle Reiner would ever breathe. And the first day Romy Reiner would speak a truth she had buried her entire life. It started just like any other casual Sunday in Brentwood. Reports say Romy had texted her mother earlier that morning, something benign. A check-in, maybe brunch plans, maybe something deeper. But sometime in the early afternoon, she made her way to the family estate. Why? That's still unclear. She told investigators she'd felt uneasy. She hadn't heard back from her mother. Calls went to voicemail. Texts left unread. For most people, that's not cause for alarm. But for Romy, it triggered something primal. Because Romy knew something most people didn't. That quiet in the Reiner household wasn't peaceful. It was dangerous. Arrival at the house. It was 5:07 p.m. when surveillance cameras captured Romy pulling into the long, gated driveway of her parents' estate. The sun was beginning to dip. The shadows stretched across the manicured hedges like long, grasping fingers. She parked, stepped out, and the moment she reached the front door, she froze. Because something was off. The door was slightly ajar. Not wide open. Not busted in. Just open enough. That's what she later told police. It was like the house was holding its breath. Let that image settle. A $13.5 million mansion. Gated. Secured. Alarmed. And the front door, hanging open. Romy didn't call anyone. Not yet. She stepped inside. And what she saw, she didn't scream. She didn't run. She walked straight into the silence. The scene. The foyer was cold. Not just cold, sterile. Romy would later describe the air as clinical, like a hospital that had been abandoned mid-surgery. And then, just inside the hallway, past the grand piano and the Degas painting, she saw it. The blood. And not just a little. It was smeared. Tracked. Splattered. She followed the trail. It led to the living room. And that's where she found them. Rob and Michelle. Side by side. Faces frozen. Stab wounds too numerous to count. Michelle's hand still clutched Rob's sleeve, as if she'd died reaching for him. Or maybe, trying to stop him. That detail, the grip, would haunt Romy forever. The 911 call. She didn't drop to her knees. She didn't sob uncontrollably. She calmly pulled out her phone. At 5:13 p.m., she dialed 911. Here's a transcript from the official call log. Operator. 911, what's your emergency? Romy, breathing shallowly, my parents. I think they're dead. Operator, are you safe right now? Is anyone else in the home? Romy, long pause, I don't know. The door was open. There's blood. Operator, Can you leave the house and wait outside for officers? Romy, whispering, there's someone in the house. That line, there's someone in the house. To this day, it's unclear whether Romy meant that literally or metaphorically. Because when officers arrived minutes later, they found only Romy. No intruder, no footsteps, no broken windows, no signs of forced entry, just a dead couple, and a daughter who looked like she hadn't slept in years. Enter the LAPD. By 5:30 p.m., multiple patrol cars and a crime scene unit were at the estate. Officers cleared the home, room by room. The only person inside, Romy. Outside, they noticed something else. The guest house lights were off, but the blinds slightly open. Inside that guest house lived Nick Reiner. And the moment police knocked on the door, Romy reportedly muttered something under her breath. You're going to want to talk to him. Let that sink in. Her parents had just been found murdered. She didn't say, where's Nick? She didn't scream, is my brother okay? She said, you're going to want to talk to him. The guest house encounter. Officers found Nick inside, alone. No signs of injury. No blood on his clothes. He answered the door groggy, confused. Claimed he'd been napping. When asked if he knew anything about what happened, he reportedly shrugged and said, I didn't hear anything. What happened? That statement, according to the lead detective, felt too clean. Not panicked, not concerned, just distant. They detained him for questioning. Meanwhile, Romy was taken into a separate car, and what she said to detectives, even in those first hours, would be the match that lit the fuse. The shift. At 6:12 p.m., Romy asked for a glass of water. When handed the bottle, she took a sip, paused, and whispered something. It was barely audible. A female officer leaned in closer and asked, Can you repeat that? And that's when Romy said it. He used to hit me. It came out like a confession, like something she'd rehearsed 1,000 times but never dared to say. But here's where things get twisted. When asked to clarify who she meant, Rob or Nick, she didn't answer. She just stared out the window and then said, There's more. It wasn't just one night. Was Romy the real target? This question has haunted both investigators and media outlets ever since. Was Romy supposed to be home that night? Was she expected at dinner? Was the killer hoping to find all three Reiners in the main house? Or did someone know she'd show up afterwards and wanted her to be the one to find them? See, here's where the story bends. Because the way Rob and Michelle were found, posed, together, without signs of a struggle, suggests one of two things. They were killed in their sleep, or they were killed by someone they trusted. But Romy insisted there were no signs of forced entry. The door was open, not broken, and nothing was taken. No jewelry, no money, no electronics. This wasn't a robbery. It was personal. The blood trail that didn't belong. Here's where things take a sharp turn. In the corner of the hallway, near the powder room, investigators found a single partial bloody footprint. Not a full shoe, not a barefoot print. A partial heel impression. Later tests would show. It didn't match Rob. It didn't match Michelle. It didn't match Romy. And it didn't match Nick's shoes, either. At least, not the pair he was wearing when police arrived. So whose was it? Where did they go? And more importantly, why wasn't there more blood leading out? The one thing Romy didn't say. In her initial interview, Romy laid out her timeline. Arrived at 5:07. Entered the home. Found the bodies. Called 911. Simple. Straightforward. Except for one thing. One tiny inconsistency. She said she walked straight into the living room. But officers found a smear of blood on the upstairs railing, meaning someone, likely her, went upstairs. When asked, Romy blinked and said, I didn't go up there. So was it a mistake? A moment she forgot in shock? Or something else? Was she following someone? Was she looking for someone? Or hiding something? Because here's the twist. In one of the upstairs bedrooms, not the master, not Rob's office, but the old nursery room from when Romy was a child, officers found a single object sitting on the dresser. A childhood diary, untouched for years. Its cover? Faded blue, with the words, Do not read, scrawled in marker. The lock had long since rusted. Inside, the first page read, Sometimes he comes in at night. I pretend to be asleep, but I know he knows I'm awake. And that was when detectives realized this case was bigger than murder. This was a legacy of silence, abuse, and family secrets finally coming to light. But it wasn't over. Because the next morning, a voice message appeared on Romy's phone. a voicemail left by her brother Nick the night before the murders. And what he said would change everything. What do you do when the person you're most afraid of sleeps 30 feet away from you? And worse, what if no one believes you because he's your brother? When Romy Reiner whispered to the detectives, "There's someone dangerous in this family," they assumed she meant Nick. How could they not? He lived in the guest house. He had a documented history of drug use. He was estranged. And now his parents were dead, brutally, violently, shockingly. And the crime scene had no signs of forced entry. But the truth wasn't that simple. Because Romy didn't say his name. She didn't say Nick. She said, "A dangerous family member." 3 words. Chilling. Intentionally vague. So vague that one of the officers asked her directly, "Do you mean your brother?" And Romy? She looked away. Didn't answer. Didn't nod. Didn't blink. Just let the question dangle in the air like a noose. Because naming him meant opening the floodgates. And once they were open, there was no going back. The brother no one wanted to talk about. Nick Reiner. If you followed the Hollywood industry, the name might ring a bell. Not for blockbuster hits or red carpet moments, but for Being Charlie, a semi-autobiographical film he co-wrote about a young addict's battle with rehab, family expectations, and rage. It was supposed to be his redemption story, a way to take control of his narrative. But behind the scenes, that narrative was still unraveling. Nick was known by many insiders as volatile. Former neighbors described hearing shouting matches from the Reiner estate. One gardener, speaking anonymously, said, "There was always a tension when Nick was around. You'd hear doors slam, sometimes glass break. But the next day, it was like nothing happened. Classic Hollywood silence. Money, status, reputation. Nothing to see here. Until now." Romy's quiet warnings. Long before the murders, years before, in fact, Romy had hinted to friends that she didn't feel safe around her brother. One former college roommate recalled a chilling moment. She didn't talk about her family much. But once, we were walking home late at night, and I asked if she was ever scared living in such a big house. She laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. Then she said, "Only when Nick's home." That was 5 years ago. Another friend shared a cryptic text Romy once sent during the pandemic. "He's back. They let him move in. I swear if anything happens to them, I'm not going to protect him again." Protect him again. That line. That one line. What had she protected him from before? And more importantly, what had happened before? A history of outbursts. Nick's problems didn't start with addiction. According to insiders close to the Reiner family, his behavioral issues began as early as age 10. Tantrums that turned into property damage. Shouting fits that ended with someone bleeding. But with money and connections, the family handled it quietly. Private school expulsions were reframed as transfers. Rehab stays were dubbed spiritual retreats. Arrests? Smoothed over. Charges dropped. It was all very curated. But beneath the surface, the cracks were growing. One former therapist, who refused to go on record but was verified through court documents, claimed that Nick displayed violent ideation during multiple sessions. He reportedly described fantasies involving punishing those he felt had wronged him. And at the top of that list, his parents and his sister. The Thanksgiving incident. Let's rewind to 2018. Thanksgiving at the Reiner estate. The entire family was present. Romy, Nick, Rob, Michelle. Reports suggest that by dessert, tension was already in the air. Nick was on edge. Romy was quiet. Rob kept looking at his watch. Then it happened. Nick allegedly erupted during a conversation about expectations. He smashed a wine glass. Screamed. Told Rob, "You think you're better than me because of your King movies?" Michelle tried to calm him down. He shoved her. Romy stood up, trying to intervene, and Nick turned to her and said, "Say one more word, and I swear to God I'll put you through that window." Silence. 10 seconds passed. No one moved. Then Rob snapped. "Enough. Out." Nick stormed off. No police were called. No reports filed. But Romy wrote about it. In her diary, the entry read, "I saw it this time. I saw in his face. He doesn't see me as his sister anymore. He sees me as something to hurt." And just days after the murders, when the police opened Romy's diary and read that line, they knew they had to dig deeper. The secret Nick never knew Romy kept. Here's where the story bends again. You remember that voicemail? The one Nick left the night before the murders? Romy didn't mention it at first. Maybe she forgot. Maybe she was too shaken. But her phone still had the timestamp. 12:03 a.m., Sunday, December 14th. The message is just 14 seconds long. Here's the transcript. Nick, you think you're safe? You think they'll always protect you? You have no idea what I'm capable of. Click. 14 seconds. No context. No explanation. But enough for detectives to raise eyebrows. Because just 17 hours later, both parents were dead. And Romy? Alive. Why? The red flag no one saw. Nick had a known history of erratic behavior. And yet, he still had access to the property. Still lived just steps away. Still had keys. In fact, police later confirmed. Nick's set of keys could open every room in the main house, including Romy's old bedroom. That wasn't an accident. That was trust. Or worse, blind denial. A dangerous man, known to snap, with full access to a family who thought they could manage him. Until they couldn't. And when Romy finally realized that the world now saw what she'd seen for years, she didn't cry. She didn't celebrate. She just said, he should be a suspect. And she meant it. But again, she never said his name. Not yet. Why she didn't name him? Here's where the psychology gets complicated. Victims of familial abuse, especially from siblings, often stay silent for reasons that seem irrational from the outside. Guilt, fear, loyalty, hope that the abuser will change. But Romy had stayed silent for too long. And now, with her parents gone, the only person left to protect was herself. Still, she didn't say Nick. Not on the record. Not in the interrogation room. Why? Because saying it would make it real. It would make it permanent. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't ready for that final rupture. Because in families like the Reiners, everything looks perfect from the outside. And breaking that illusion, even in the wake of murder, can feel like betrayal. But what Romy didn't know was that the betrayal had already happened, long before the murders, long before the voicemail, because police were about to uncover a sealed court record, one that would confirm Romy had tried to warn people years ago, and no one listened. What if the truth wasn't hidden in police files, but in a child's handwriting, frozen in time? The diary wasn't supposed to be found. That much was clear. It sat on the dresser in the upstairs bedroom that no one used anymore. The room that had once been painted a pale yellow. The room that still smelled faintly of old books and dust, and something else, something metallic that no amount of time quite erased. This was Romy's room. Not the room she slept in now. The room she survived in then. And the fact that the diary was sitting out in the open, not tucked away, not locked inside a drawer, raised an immediate, unsettling question for detectives. Why now? Why here? Why this room? Because according to Romy, she hadn't set foot in that bedroom in years. She had no reason to go upstairs that night. No reason to open the door. No reason to touch the past. And yet, the blood smear on the banister suggested otherwise. So when officers asked her again, gently this time, whether she had gone upstairs before calling 911, Romy's composure finally cracked. I don't remember, she said. But the diary remembered everything. The cover that said it all. The notebook was small. Child-sized. Blue cardboard cover. Corners chewed. The spine taped and retaped over the years. Across the front, written in uneven marker strokes, were 4 words. Do not read this. Not a joke. Not decorative. A warning. Inside, the pages were filled with a child's handwriting that evolved as the years passed. Neat at first, then rushed, then jagged. The earliest entries were innocent. Drawings, crushes, lists of favorite movies. But then, slowly, the tone shifted. And once it shifted, it never went back. The first entry that made detectives stop. About a third of the way in, one entry was circled in red pen. The date was smudged, but the year was clear. She was 9. The entry read, Mom says Dad is tired. That's why he yells. I try not to make noise. When I'm quiet, it's better. Quiet. That word came up again and again. Quiet meant safe. Quiet meant invisible. Quiet meant surviving the night. Ask yourself something. What kind of child learns that lesson so young? When words turn to fear. As the diary continued, the language changed. Shorter sentences. Incomplete thoughts. Drawings replaced words. Stick figures. One tall, one small. Sometimes the tall one had no face. Sometimes the small one was drawn in the corner of the page. One entry read, He grabbed my arm today. It hurt, but I didn't cry. I won. Did you catch that? I didn't cry. I won. A child redefining pain as victory. That's not imagination. That's conditioning. The night entries. The most disturbing pages weren't dated at all. Just scribbled lines, written in pencil so hard it tore the paper. He comes in at night. I pretend I'm asleep. I can hear his breathing. If I don't move, it stops faster. Stops. Not leaves. Not goes away. Stops. Detectives reading those pages later described the room as uncomfortably silent. No one spoke, because no one needed to. Contradictions that changed everything. Here's where the story becomes even more complicated. Mixed in with the fear were entries that praised him. He bought me a necklace. He said he was proud of me today. He said I'm special. And then, just pages later, I don't like when he says I'm special. This contradiction wasn't accidental. It was the psychological whiplash of a child trapped between love and fear. And if you've ever wondered why victims stay silent for decades, this is why. Because when harm comes wrapped in affection, the mind does gymnastics just to survive. Why Romy never told anyone. The diary answered that too. There was an entry written in purple ink, clearly older. Teenage years. I tried to tell Mom today. She cried. She said I misunderstood. She said he'd never hurt me on purpose. That sentence ended with a line drawn so hard it ripped through the page. Underneath it, in smaller letters, I won't tell again. And she didn't. Not teachers. Not doctors. Not friends. Because the first time she tried, she learned the most devastating lesson of all. The truth didn't protect her. It protected him. The page that was torn out. Detectives noticed something else. One page was missing, ripped clean from the binding. Only the torn edge remained. When asked about it, Romy shook her head. I don't know what was on it, she said. But investigators weren't convinced. Because the torn page fell right between two entries, both referencing the same thing. A big fight. A mistake. A promise never to do it again. What was on that missing page? And who removed it? Romy? Or someone else? The timing that made it worse. Here's the detail that turned suspicion into alarm. The diary hadn't been disturbed in years. But there were fingerprints on the cover. Fresh ones. Not Romy's. Not Michelle's. Not Rob's. Someone had handled that diary recently. Someone had opened it. Someone had read it. And then put it back. Ask yourself this. If you were planning something irreversible, wouldn't you want to know what secrets might come out afterward? The confrontation no one knew about. Buried near the back of the diary was the last entry Romy ever wrote. She was 23. I told him I remember. He laughed. He said I was confused. He said no one would believe me. And then, one final line. But Nick believes me. That single sentence stopped the investigation cold. Because until that moment, detectives had assumed Nick was just a volatile presence. A suspect. A danger. But this line suggested something else entirely. That Romy had confided in him. That he knew. And that he might not have been the monster everyone thought. Or worse, that he had been carrying this truth for years. And maybe, just maybe, it broke him. The question that changed the case. When detectives closed the diary and looked at Romy again, they didn't ask about the murders. They asked this instead. Who else knew about this? Romy hesitated. Her hands trembled. And then she said, I think my dad found it. That revelation reframed everything. Because if Rob had found the diary, if he knew what Romy remembered, if he knew the truth was written down, then the timeline shifted, the motive shifted, and the danger shifted. Because suddenly, the murders didn't look like the beginning of a tragedy. They looked like the end of a very long war. And the next chapter of that war? It didn't start with a knife. It started with a mother who stayed silent, and a family that chose appearances over protection. But what Michelle Reiner knew, and when she knew it, would turn this story upside down. And that's where we're going next. She slept beside him for 50 years. She raised children in the same house. So how could Michelle Reiner not know what was happening? Or did she? She was the silent one. While Rob Reiner stood at podiums, gave interviews, and received awards, Michelle Singer Reiner remained in the background, a quiet presence at his side. Beautiful, composed, unassuming. But behind those warm smiles and designer scarves was a woman carrying something. Now, the world is asking, what did Michelle know about her husband? What did she see? And why didn't she stop it? Was she a protector? Or was she complicit? Because in a house filled with secrets, silence isn't neutral. It's a choice. And Michelle made that choice, again and again. A marriage of appearances. Michelle and Rob were married in 1989. To the public, they were rock solid. They had one of Hollywood's rare, lasting marriages. Photos of them from the 90s show them smiling on red carpets, arms linked, laughter in their eyes. But as Romy's diary made clear, things were not always what they seemed. One entry from 2004 read, "Mom doesn't like it when I talk about the bruises. She says we're a strong family. She says I need to forgive. Forgive. Not report. Not question. Not protect. Forgive." It's the kind of word that, in the wrong context, becomes poison. The warning signs. Those close to the family said Michelle often walked on eggshells around Rob, especially when he was stressed. One former assistant recalled, "She wasn't scared of him exactly, but she managed him, like you'd manage a thunderstorm you couldn't stop, only prepare for." That management extended to their children, too. Multiple former housekeepers described scenes where Rob would raise his voice, bang doors, or lash out, and Michelle would instantly sweep in. Like a shadow, calm, smiling, diffusing the tension, but never correcting him, never interrupting, never challenging. She would whisper to the kids, "Don't upset your father," one staff member said. Never, "He shouldn't have done that." Always, "Don't make it worse." That wasn't parenting. That was containment. The slap at Sundance. One event stood out in Romy's diary. It happened in 2007, during a trip to the Sundance Film Festival. Rob had a documentary screening. The whole family went. According to Romy's journal, there was a dinner at a cabin. A toast, laughter, wine, and then a joke. Romy made a sarcastic remark about her father's new film. Something light, something teasing. Rob didn't laugh. Instead, Romy wrote, "He grabbed me by the arm and pulled me outside. He slapped me. It wasn't hard, but it was meant to scare me. I looked back at the cabin. Mom was watching through the window. She didn't move." That sentence, "she didn't move," haunted investigators. They tracked down a friend who had attended that same dinner. She confirmed there was a moment when Rob and Romy stepped outside. Said it felt tense. When asked if Michelle looked concerned, the woman hesitated. Then said, "She looked tired." Michelle's personal journal. Here's where things get complicated. After the murders, police discovered a locked drawer in Rob and Michelle's shared home office. Inside, they found something unexpected. Michelle's journal. Not a diary, exactly. More like scattered thoughts. Lists. Reflections. Scribbles on the backs of printed scripts. But between shopping lists and party planning notes, there were entries that revealed a woman unraveling. One page read, "He gets cold when he drinks. Not cruel. Just elsewhere. Sometimes I worry he'll say something to the kids that I can't take back." Another read, "Nick is spiraling again. I'm scared of what Romy will remember." And then, the final entry dated 1 week before the murders. "They're fighting again. This time it's not just yelling. I don't know what to do anymore. I think Romy knows." The phone call she made. That entry aligned with a phone call. On December 7th, Michelle called her sister in New York. Records confirm the call lasted 48 minutes. No recording exists, but the sister later told detectives. She sounded worn down. Said she felt like something was coming. Like a storm. When asked if Michelle mentioned Rob or Nick by name, she wouldn't answer. But her final quote? "I should have done something sooner." Sooner. A word filled with regret. And maybe guilt. Was Michelle a victim, too? This is where the narrative splits. Some argue Michelle was a textbook enabler. Someone who knew what was happening and allowed it for the sake of the family name. Others say she was caught in her own prison. A woman who feared rocking the boat because she knew just how deep the water was. But the truth? It may be both. Because people who live in systems of control often adopt the system's logic just to survive. Michelle may have believed she was keeping the family together. That minimizing the damage was the best she could do. But the silence didn't protect her. In the end, it killed her. A mother's love or a mother's denial. One page of Romy's diary paints it painfully clear. Sometimes she hugs me after he yells. She says I'm brave, but she never tells him to stop. And that hurts more than the yelling. This is what happens when protection turns into permission. When mothers confuse keeping peace with keeping silent. When the fear of losing your family becomes more powerful than the truth that it's already broken. The necklace incident. One former family friend shared an incident never before made public. At Romy's 16th birthday party, Rob gave her a necklace, a thin gold chain with a diamond charm. Later that night, guests said Romy seemed upset. According to the friend, she told me, "He only gives gifts when he wants me to forget something." I didn't know what to say. The next day, Michelle took Romy shopping, bought her new shoes, a coat, a bag, a mother's way of saying, "I see you," without saying anything at all. The final hours. On the night of the murders, Michelle and Rob were last seen together on the back patio at 8:43 p.m., drinking wine. Footage from a neighbor's doorbell cam caught faint audio of their voices, laughter, followed by what sounded like an argument. At 9:14 p.m., all lights in the main house went dark. But at 9:47 p.m., a motion sensor was triggered in the upstairs hallway, near Romy's old bedroom. Why? Who went up there? Why was the diary moved? And did Michelle know that this time silence would not be enough? Because just before midnight, the alarm system was briefly disabled from Michelle's personal code. It was reactivated 14 minutes later, and at 1:06 a.m., both Rob and Michelle were dead. Ask yourself, what was she trying to let in? Or, who was she trying to let out? The truth in her final act. Michelle didn't leave a note, but tucked behind a family photo on her nightstand was a piece of paper. On it, scribbled in black ink, "I tried to protect everyone. I failed." 8 words. No signature. But the handwriting matched her journal. And maybe, just maybe, those 8 words are the closest thing to a confession we'll ever get. Not of a crime, but of complicity, of fear, of love turned into silence. But what if Michelle wasn't the last to find out about Rob's past? What if someone else, someone even closer to Rob, had been harboring a secret of their own? Because just days after the murders, someone came forward with a letter Rob wrote before his death. A letter he never mailed. And what it said could rewrite the entire story. How do you hide darkness in plain sight? You turn it into charm. You wrap it in laughter. You direct it like a movie. And Rob Reiner? He was a master at all 3. The world knew him as a legend, a trailblazer, a man who gave us The Princess Bride, Stand By Me, When Harry Met Sally. He made us laugh, cry, reflect. He was, as the press often repeated, the father figure of modern cinema. But behind the curtain, when the cameras weren't rolling, there were whispers. People who worked with him called him a perfectionist. Others used stronger words. Controlling, cold, sometimes explosive. But no one wanted to question him. Because Rob wasn't just powerful, he was respected. And more dangerous than that, he was beloved. So when Romy whispered, "He used to hit me," the world didn't just gasp at the claim. It resisted it. Because believing Romy meant unlearning decades of Hollywood myth. And no one wants to see the man who made the bucket list as the villain, building the perfect persona. From the start, Rob Reiner's brand wasn't just talent, it was decency. He was the son of Carl Reiner, the comedy icon. He grew up among legends. And when he starred as Michael Meathead Stivic on All in the Family, he didn't just play a progressive, he became one. Or so it seemed. He marched for women's rights. He campaigned against smoking. He spoke out against war. He raised money for mental health causes. He was the kind of man Hollywood needed to believe in. And he was smart enough to know it. Because for Rob, perception was everything. Controlling the narrative. A longtime assistant, who asked not to be named, said it best. Rob didn't just manage his career. He managed reality. If something went wrong on set, it didn't. If an actor pushed back, they were difficult. If a tabloid sniffed around, legal threats came fast. And when it came to his family, it was even tighter. Image, the assistant said, was sacred. He once said in a meeting, "I can survive a flop. I can't survive a scandal." Think about that. Now think about Romy, growing up under that kind of control, where even emotions had to be rehearsed. How do you speak the truth? The anecdotes that aged badly. There were interviews. Lots of them. Talk shows. Behind-the-scenes specials. Award show panels. And in many of them, Rob told stories about his family. Some were funny. Some, in hindsight, were red flags. Like the time he told Conan O'Brien that his daughter once talked back during a dinner and he taught her a lesson in respect. The audience laughed. But Romy, sitting off camera in the wings that night, reportedly didn't. In another interview, Rob joked, "Parenting is about breaking a kid down just enough so they behave, but not so much that they need therapy." The audience roared. But now, after the diary, it hits different, doesn't it? Because what if those weren't jokes? What if they were confessions hidden behind punchlines? On-set behavior, the private tyrant? Multiple sources from past film crews have since come forward, anonymously, describing Rob as someone who could flip like a switch. He was great 90% of the time, one cinematographer said. Funny, collaborative, sharp. But when things didn't go his way, he had a temper. A real one. Another producer claimed. He once slammed a script binder so hard against the wall it cracked the drywall. Did anyone report him? No. Why? Because he was Rob Reiner. And more than that, he was a liberal icon. No one wanted to bring down the man fighting for justice, even if he was cruel behind the scenes. See the irony? The man who made a career championing truth may have buried his own. The rewriting of Romy. Here's where it gets insidious. According to Romy's diary, any time she acted out, expressed anger, or questioned her father, he didn't just shut her down. He rewrote her, told her she was emotional, that she was misremembering, that she was too sensitive. One entry reads, "He says I dreamt it, that I'm making it worse than it was. But I know it happened. I felt it. Gaslighting. Not overt. Not screaming in her face. But slow. Subtle. Steady. A master director, editing his daughter's mind in real time. The letter he never sent." This next part is shocking. 3 days after the murders, a close friend of Rob Reiner's turned over a letter. One Rob had written weeks before his death, but never mailed. It was addressed to Romy. It was never sealed, just folded, yellowed at the edges. And inside, Rob wrote, "You're old enough now to understand the truth. I made mistakes, but the worst one was letting you believe you were right. You weren't. You aren't. And I can't let you destroy this family." He went on, "I love you, but I can't let lies define my legacy. If you keep this up, I will respond." A threat? A plea? A confession? Or manipulation? One last time? Legacy over love. That's the phrase investigators scribbled in their notes. Because that's what it boiled down to for Rob. Not fixing what was broken, not healing what was harmed, but protecting the legacy. One family friend said it bluntly. Rob would rather be remembered as a good man than be an honest one. And maybe that's the most tragic part. Because if he'd told the truth, if he'd apologized, if he'd seen Romy, this story might have ended with reconciliation. Instead, it ended in blood. The control didn't die with him. Even in death, Rob tried to manage the story. The estate was locked down. PR teams were on standby. Legal teams contacted media outlets within hours of the news breaking, insisting the family be given privacy. But privacy from what? From grief? Or from the truth? Because while the world mourned, Romy opened her mouth, and everything changed. Romy's revelation and the world's denial. When Romy first told investigators, "He used to hit me," they believed her. But when the news leaked, social media split. Some called her brave. Others called her a liar trying to cash in. One journalist tweeted, "She had 29 years to say something. Now, after the murders? I don't buy it." Another wrote, "Rob Reiner would never. Not him. Not meathead. But trauma doesn't work on a schedule. And abusers don't wear warning signs. They wear tuxedos. And win awards. And direct your favorite movie." So let's ask the real question. What if Romy had spoken out years ago? Would we have listened? Or would we have done exactly what people are doing now, defended the myth and destroyed the survivor? Because Rob Reiner was a storyteller. He knew how to make the audience cheer. He knew how to paint the villain. He just never thought the script would flip. But now it's Romy's story, and she's telling it without edits. And what she reveals next will shatter the last illusion. Because being Charlie, the movie Nick Reiner co-wrote, was supposed to be his redemption. But buried in its script are clues to something darker, something no one noticed. Until now, it was just a car ride home from a red carpet premiere. But for Romy Reiner, it was the moment everything changed. Because that night, the mask slipped, and her father showed her who he really was. The night had all the makings of a perfect Hollywood memory. Cameras flashing, fans cheering, the Reiner family, Rob, Michelle, and a 7-year-old Romy, smiling for the photographers outside the ArcLight Cinema in Los Angeles. It was the premiere of The Story of Us, a film Rob hadn't directed, but was heavily involved in promoting. The night was meant to be glamorous. And for most people watching it was. But for Romy, the real story began after the cameras stopped rolling, when the applause faded, when the limo door closed, when the only eyes on them were her father's. dark, sharp, unblinking. What happened in the back seat of that car would scar her forever. And no one, not her mother, not the driver, not the bodyguard, said a word. Not then. Not for years. A red carpet smile, a silent scream. Photos from that night are still online. Romy's tiny hand in her father's. Her smile, tense. Not beaming. Just enough. One journalist even commented. She looks shy, like she's not used to the spotlight. But now, through the lens of Romy's diary, we know better. She wasn't shy. She was scared. One entry from 2 days later reads, I didn't want to say the wrong thing, so I just smiled. But I knew I would pay for what I did in the car. What she did? She asked a question. That's all it took. The question that sparked the storm. According to Romy's diary and a later police interview, the ride home was quiet. Until it wasn't. Romy, like most kids her age, was curious. And with the adrenaline of the night still buzzing in her tiny body, she asked, Daddy, why do people clap for you if you're not in the movie? That was it. A harmless question. But to Rob, it wasn't harmless. It was insulting. It was disrespect. And he didn't tolerate disrespect. Not from critics, not from producers, and certainly not from his daughter. You ungrateful little girl. The words came fast. What did you just say to me? You think I don't deserve applause? You don't know what I do. Michelle tried to intervene. Rob, she's just a kid. But he cut her off. No, she needs to learn now. This isn't funny anymore. Romy, suddenly aware that she'd crossed a line, tried to apologize. But it was too late. Rob grabbed her by the wrist, not hard enough to leave a mark, but hard enough for her to remember. Forever. The limo driver's statement. Years later, in 2024, when Romy first spoke to authorities in detail, detectives tracked down the limo driver from that night. A man named Alex Martinez. He was reluctant at first. Said he didn't want to tarnish a legacy. But off the record, he admitted this. He lost his temper. The little girl looked terrified. I saw it in the mirror. When asked why he didn't report it, Alex said, that wasn't my place. It was a private family moment. And besides, who would believe me over Rob Reiner? There it is again. Silence, paid for by power. The morning after. The next morning, Romy didn't go to school. A staff member called in sick for her. She stayed in her room. Door shut, lights off. According to her diary, no one checked on me, not even Mom. But at 11 a.m., a gift bag appeared on my bed. Inside was a stuffed bear. No note, just the bear. That was the pattern. Explosion. Silence. Gift. Repeat. And with each repetition, Romy's sense of reality twisted further. What do you do when the person who hurts you is also the one who gives you comfort? How do you tell the difference? The pattern of erasure. Romy began to understand something chilling by the time she was 10. If she cried, she was dramatic. If she flinched, she was overreacting. If she told the truth, she was confused. Her memories were rewritten in real time. That limo ride in 2004 wasn't isolated. It was just the first time she understood what was happening. Because Rob didn't just control the family. He curated them. Every emotion, every reaction, every truth. He was always directing, always editing. And when reality didn't fit his script, he cut it. The interview that didn't age well. In 2005, Rob did an interview with Entertainment Tonight. He talked about family balance and being a father again later in life. When asked about Romy, he smiled and said, she's precocious. We butt heads sometimes, but she'll thank me one day. At the time, it sounded sweet, stern, but loving. Now, it feels like foreshadowing. Because that's what abusers do. They plant doubt in advance. They preemptively discredit the ones they fear will speak out. And the world, the press, the fans, we bought it. We always do. Romy's shifting relationship with her voice. After that incident, Romy grew quieter. Her teachers noticed. One wrote on a report card, bright, but hesitant to speak in class. Often looks to others before answering. Therapists call this hypervigilance. It's common in trauma survivors, especially children of emotional abuse. You learn to study the room before you speak. You ask yourself, is this safe? You begin editing your personality just to avoid consequences. And in Romy's case, the editing started in the back seat of a limousine. Did Michelle know? According to Romy, her mother did know. She was there. She saw the grip. She heard the shouting. But later that night, she said nothing. No apology. No explanation. Just a kiss on the forehead and a whispered, "Get some sleep, sweetie." And for a child, that's worse than rage. Because silence from the one who's supposed to protect you feels like betrayal. And betrayal cuts deeper than any slap. The therapy sessions that went nowhere. After that incident, Rob sent Romy to therapy. But not to heal, to manage, to contain. He selected the therapist, paid them directly, controlled the narrative. Romy, in one journal entry, wrote, "He told me to tell her I had anxiety, that it wasn't about him. He said if I told the truth, she'd think I was crazy." Let that sink in. She was sent to therapy, but told not to heal, told to perform. And she did, for years, until the sessions stopped, until she stopped speaking altogether. Revisiting the limo ride, 20 years later. In 2025, Romy sat down with a trauma specialist, part of the homicide investigation support team. When asked what her earliest clear memory of fear was, she said, "The limo ride." She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She just said it plainly. And that, more than anything, told investigators just how deep the damage went. Because when a memory becomes a cornerstone of your identity, it doesn't hurt anymore. It just is. What that incident represents. This wasn't about one slap, one mistake, one bad night. It was the blueprint. The moment Rob tested how far he could go and realized no one would stop him. Not Michelle, not the driver, not Romy. And from that moment on, he stopped hiding it completely. Because he didn't have to. The world was too busy clapping. But what if Romy wasn't the only one? What if the violence she endured was passed on? Because her brother Nick, troubled, volatile, broken, once wrote a movie about addiction and pain. And buried in that script is a scene that mirrors the limo ride. Word for word. A scene that investigators now believe might have been Nick's way of confessing to his own trauma. And what Romy discovered about being Charlie will blow this case wide open. What if the person sending you to therapy was the very reason you needed it? What if every session you sat through, every question you answered, every time you tried to heal, was being monitored, manipulated, and weaponized against you? That was Romy Reiner's reality. She was 10 when she had her first therapy session. Not because she asked for it. Not because a teacher noticed something was wrong. Not because a school counselor made a referral. No, she was sent by her father, Rob Reiner. The same man who had allegedly grabbed her wrist in the back of a limo, shouted her into silence, rewritten her memories, and turned her home into a house of mirrors. He told her it was for stress, told her she was too sensitive, that she needed to talk to someone about her anxiety. And at first, Romy believed him. Because why wouldn't she? He was Rob Reiner, her dad, the one the world adored. The one who smiled for cameras and waved on talk shows, and was always being praised for raising a strong, grounded family. But what she didn't know, what number 10-year-old could possibly understand, was that therapy in the Reiner household wasn't for healing. It was for control. The therapist with the NDA. The woman's name was Dr. Candace Milton. Licensed, reputable, highly regarded in elite LA circles, and very, very exclusive. She only took clients by referral, and Rob Reiner referred many. Actors, writers, executives, and now his daughter. What no one knew at the time was that Dr. Milton had signed a non-disclosure agreement with Rob years earlier, part of a family privacy contract tied to his public image. What that meant, in plain English, whatever Romy said in therapy, Rob would eventually know. And worse, so would Michelle. So from the very beginning, Romy wasn't walking into a safe space. She was walking into a trap. Session 1, the setup. According to Romy's later recollection, the first session started like any other. Coloring pages. Simple questions. Warm lighting. Dr. Milton asked about school, friends, hobbies. Then, gently, she asked about home. And Romy paused. She didn't answer. Because deep down, she knew. She knew some doors shouldn't be opened. Especially when the person holding the keys is standing just outside the door. What Romy said and didn't say. Over the next few months, Romy went to Dr. Milton weekly. She was well-behaved, polite, articulate beyond her years. She talked about being nervous at school, about feeling pressure to be good. She said she wanted to make her parents proud. What she didn't say? That she flinched when her father raised his voice. That she hated the way he stared at her when she made a mistake. That he once told her, "No one will ever believe you over me." That came later, in her journal. Because even as a child, Romy understood that truth had consequences. And in her house, truth could get you hurt. The day she broke the script. It happened in year 2. Romy was 11. She'd had a panic attack at school. A full shutdown. Couldn't breathe. When Dr. Milton asked what triggered it, Romy hesitated, then whispered, "Sometimes my dad gets angry. And when he does, I feel like I'm not real." That was the closest she'd ever come to saying it out loud. And Dr. Milton? She wrote it down, then changed the subject. No follow-up. No gentle probing. Just a redirection. "Let's talk about your breathing exercises again." Romy never said anything like that again. Because even in her silence, she could feel the message. We don't go there. Behind the scenes. What Romy didn't know until much later, and what would only be revealed during the post-murder investigation, was that Dr. Milton had been regularly briefing Rob and Michelle. Informal summaries. General wellness updates. No direct quotes, but the gist of things. She's doing better. She's still adjusting. She mentioned school stress. But the truth was, Romy wasn't getting better. She was just getting quieter. The threats at home. Around age 13, Romy started asking harder questions at home. Why did she need therapy if she was fine? Why wasn't Nick ever sent to talk to someone, even though he punched walls and threw things? And that's when Rob snapped. According to her diary, he said, "If I told the therapist anything embarrassing, I'd ruin the family." He said people like us don't air laundry. He ended with something Romy would remember word for the rest of her life. "If you say something stupid in that room, I'll make sure you regret it." So the next session, she didn't say anything. She just smiled, nodded, doodled in her notebook. And the therapist told Rob, "She's improving. Control by proxy." This is the genius of manipulation. You don't have to be in the room to be in control. You just need to convince the other person that their words, their pain, are being monitored. And Romy, by age 14, had learned to self-censor with surgical precision. One entry from that year. "I think about screaming in the office sometimes. Just telling her everything. But I can't. He'd find out. He always does." Even her thoughts had been colonized. The hidden recording. Here's where the story takes a shocking turn. At 15, Romy began recording her own therapy sessions. Using a small voice recorder hidden in her backpack. Why? Because she didn't trust anyone to believe her. One of those recordings, later turned over to detectives, captures a chilling exchange. "Dr. Milton, your dad says you've been quieter lately." "Romy, he talks to you?" "Dr. Milton." Long pause. "Only about general progress." "Romy, so you tell him what I say?" "Dr. Milton." "No, but we do coordinate. We all want what's best for you." "Romy, what if what's best for me is not him?" "Dr. Milton." Silence. Recording ends. A break in the pattern. At 17, Romy stopped going to therapy. No explanation. She simply told her father she didn't need it anymore. And surprisingly, he agreed. Because by then, she wasn't a threat. She was obedient, contained, silent. And silence, in abusive systems, is mistaken for peace. The final confrontation. It wasn't until she was 22 that Romy brought it up again, not in therapy, but in the kitchen. She confronted Rob. Told him she remembered what happened in the limo. That she remembered every slap, every insult, every look. And according to her account, Rob didn't deny it. He didn't apologize either. He simply said, "You have a vivid imagination." That sentence, so calm, so dismissive, was the last straw. Because it wasn't just gaslighting. It was erasure. A final insult to her reality. The therapy that finally helped. At 26, Romy found a new therapist, one her father didn't know. No NDAs. No backdoor phone calls. No summaries sent to Brentwood. And for the first time in her life, she told the truth. All of it. And when the therapist didn't flinch, Romy broke down. Because when you live your entire life in a hall of mirrors, sometimes all you need is one real reflection. But that healing came too late for some. Because while Romy was just learning to speak, Nick was spiraling. And what he put into the movie Being Charlie, a film about addiction and rage, might have been his own desperate cry for help. And what Romy discovered in the script will blow this case wide open. What do you do when the person you're most afraid of sleeps 30 feet away from you? And worse, what if no one believes you? Because he's your brother? When Romy Reiner whispered to the detectives, "There's someone dangerous in this family," they assumed she meant Nick. How could they not? He lived in the guest house. He had a documented history of drug use. He was estranged. And now, his parents were dead, brutally, violently, shockingly. And the crime scene had no signs of forced entry. But the truth wasn't that simple. Because Romy didn't say his name. She didn't say Nick. She said, a dangerous family member. 3 words. Chilling. Intentionally vague. So vague that one of the officers asked her directly, do you mean your brother? And Romy? She looked away. Didn't answer. Didn't nod. Didn't blink. Just let the question dangle in the air like a noose. Because naming him meant opening the floodgates. And once they were open, there was no going back. The brother no one wanted to talk about. Nick Reiner. If you followed the Hollywood industry, the name might ring a bell. Not for blockbuster hits or red carpet moments, but for Being Charlie, a semi-autobiographical film he co-wrote about a young addict's battle with rehab, family expectations, and rage. It was supposed to be his redemption story, a way to take control of his narrative. But behind the scenes, that narrative was still unraveling. Nick was known by many insiders as volatile. Former neighbors described hearing